Hey YouTube, it's June in the garden and it's time to talk about what we're doing. I'm going to be moving everything out of the greenhouse today. It is June 4th, and usually if you've watched my prior garden videos, we always have a cold night somewhere in the first week of June. So I leave everything safely somewhere not in the garden until after that cold night. We don't have a cold night coming up. I think tonight is the coldest. It's going to be at 47. So it's time to get these things out of the greenhouse. We've got the tomatoes and peppers and all the squash and melon are behind me, and I'm going to go and I'm going to plant my second crops of radishes, lettuce. We're going to replant some onions because the seeds that I bought at the store did not germinate well. My saved seeds did though, so that's interesting. And I'm going to be making some rows and showing you how I do my green beans and all of my row crops in the ground and how I measure some things, some of my tricks and things we're doing in June. So let's get this stuff moved out of the greenhouse and I will see you in the garden. Let's go check it out. This little cart I've had, we've probably had this for 30 years. It's so old. I will show you what's going on out here. We just brought in a bunch of new soil and dumped it here because we had a really low spot. If you watched the video last year, we scraped all of this out and just pulled off the top layer of weeds and garbage and removed it. So we had to bring in new dirt. Plus it just really needed an update on dirt. So I've got potatoes planted that I did yesterday. We only did 8 hills of potatoes, so I'm hoping that will be enough. We're gonna start making some rows here and I'll show you my tricks I've learned over the years, how to put in my rows, how to measure, how much space I want between everything, and we'll get all of the rest of the row crops in the ground. The first thing we're gonna do is put some stuff in these 2 beds, which are still empty. I am going to use this for dill this year because one thing I have learned is that when you plant your cucumbers, usually if you plant dill at about the same time, you're going to end up with dill that's ready to go when you're ready to make pickles. Here's what I've got to plant out today. So we're going to do the dill, and I love these boxes. These are in another video, but love these. I'll put the link below. That's going to go in that bed, and then my other bed, which is over there, I've got all my tools and junk here, but my other bed over there, I'm going to be refilling the onion, because you can see that the onion I planted prior, my seeds that I saved and planted came up way better than the store-bought ones, so we're going to replant my seeds and fill in some gaps where they didn't germinate as well as I wanted. And then we're going to do succession plant a couple more rows of lettuce and radish just to have them coming on. And then out in the ground, I'm going to make beds to put in wax beans, kidney beans, and green beans. I have green beans in that bag right there, and a little bit of corn. I'm not going to do our usual giant block of corn, but I will show you some tricks I've learned about staking up my kidney beans. I don't stake up runner beans and green beans. I do those as bush, but kidney beans want to grow on stakes, and I'll show you what I've made for that and my trick for measuring my rows, which just has to do with this lovely old rake. Check this out. This is just my standard rake, but I use it to make my rows, and I'll show you how we do it. What I like to do is I use, for non-vining rows and things that are just going to stay compact, I like to use my rake. That is the width of the walking path. So this rake does triple duty for me, but I use it to make my walkway, which is only going to be that wide between rows. So there's the walkway width, because it's just wide enough to walk down it. I don't want a lot of big open rows. When you're planting a lot of vegetables, you want to make use of all the soil. And then what I've done, I like my rows to be 4 feet wide, and I get tired of bringing a tape measure out. So I painted a mark on the rake. So I know if I lay this rake down, that's a 4-foot mark. So I can use the end for my walkway, and then I just lay the end of the rake in the walkway I just made, measure over to here, and I usually just do, and it's you know, ish, 4-ish, but there's my next walkway. And then I'll just take the rake here and pull a walkway there, if that makes sense. So you've got a walkway there, a bed in here that's 4 feet wide, and a walkway here. And then once I have the framework of that, I'll put strings to make sure we're straight to the end of the bed here, and then I'll start smoothing out this middle bed to become the planting area. And I've got my Sharpie and my handy dandy little labels, and you can get these labels anywhere. I got them on Amazon because why not? I'll put a link down below. Dill. These are pretty flimsy, actually. I prefer one that's, these are, look, I mean, they're like, I like the ones that are more stiff. Like when you put them in the ground, they have a little more strength to them, but you know, they work and they were cheap. So I probably won't be reusing them. And this is my dill seed that I saved from 2021. And it's going to be fine, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in. 1 year though, be careful with the dill and fennel, I think it was. I planted what I thought was dill 1 year, great big patch of it, yay, dill, and it came up and I was like, man, why is this not doing what I think it should be doing? It was fennel. I had a whole bed of fennel and I had pickles ready to make, and I had fennel growing in the garden, which we're not, I mean, we don't eat a lot of fennel, so that was super weird. But we learned how to cook fennel that year. And dill, you don't need it to be this deep. This is my favorite little tool, and I just like to make my rows with it. And I'm just kind of spacing them because I have lots of room here. I'm just going to space them kind of far apart, but they don't, I mean, dill will reseed actually once you get it going in a spot. Like I'll plant these here. This is the first year with these raised beds, and this will probably always be my dill bed because they will reseed where you put them in the ground. If you leave the ground alone, they will definitely come back up the next year. So really you only have to plant dill once, even here in the north. And I'm going to plant it pretty heavy because I have a ton of seeds that I've saved. So I'm not really super particular about how many are going in, and I'm certainly not going to thin them or anything at any point later on. They're just going to be a patch of dill right here. And if you're making pickles and your dill heads aren't ready yet, which is a sad but possibility, and you want to make dill pickles, I think I did a video about that, how to make pickles without fresh dill, because I had my pickles, cucumbers were ready and my dill wasn't, and I didn't feel like running to the store right then, so I just used dill seed for the pickles and they were fine. And then I have a hose to hand water. I always hand water all my seed beds, and our irrigation right now is not functional. It needs a whole bunch of work done that's going to be done here pretty soon, so I'm just out here hand watering stuff, which is nice because this time of year I like to be out here every day really paying attention to what the seed beds are doing, and that way you can keep track of what, you know, how your germination is doing and if the birds are getting your sprouts and all of that. We're going to use this little bed for these peppers, and you can see how badly they took a beating. Even in the greenhouse they lost a lot of their leaves and they're pretty stunted, but I'm going to put them in the ground and I know they'll be okay, but they do not look great today. And I just do a hole, and I'm going to put them fairly close to the edge because I want a row of 4. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and this is a 4-foot bed, so these are close to a foot apart but not quite, more like maybe the 8 to 10 inch spacing. And I just put them in at basically the depth they were at. Make sure you remove any of the extra, this bit of the extra peat pot from around the top, especially if you're going to set these at the same depth they're planted. If you have some of that peat pot sticking up above the soil level, it tends to, like, it'll dry out the plant because the peat will be dry above the ground. And somehow I've noticed if I do this and leave this little rim, see how there's like a little extra rim of stuff around that, if that's sticking up above the ground and it's dry, it tends to dry the whole plant out quicker than if you take that off and have just moist soil. There, and those are ready. And then the Romanian peppers are going to go here, so we just have a little gap right there, which is fine. And sometimes if I have a gap like that, I'll just put a flower, you know, put some nasturtiums or a little marigold in there, or an herb. You know, if you have a single herb that you want to plant, you could do that. But just kind of, I like to fill in the gaps with little flowers, especially if there's companion plants for peppers or for whatever you have going. I know marigolds are a good companion plant for tomatoes, so they might be a good one for pepper, but I think marigolds have something that, I think it repels tomato hornworm, but don't quote me because I'm just pulling that out of the top of my head. My goodness, those are so small and sad. But by July and August, we'll be getting peppers. We definitely don't get peppers. We don't get peppers or tomatoes. No, everyone's getting their fresh tomatoes by, 4th of July. No. This is June 4th. We're not going to be picking peppers and tomatoes for the 4th. So I think because I have 2 zucchini, which is probably more than you need, do not I beg you, plant a row of zucchini. You will be so sorry. You'll be that person that's setting it out on the curb and leaving it for the neighbors and putting it for free and dropping it off at food banks and whatnot. Zucchini, I have zucchini and crookneck, and I usually plant them right next to each other and it's never a problem, but I thought this year why not just put them separate. They don't really, I don't think they cross-pollinate, although I have had some weird things happen with squash that look like a combination of spaghetti squash and zucchini. So I'm going to put the zucchinis over here, and I'm going to keep them well away from those peppers because these things will get so big. And this will be a first doing these in raised beds because I've always just done them in the ground. So first time doing zucchinis in raised beds, but you know what? I can't even tell you how lovely these raised beds. Look at where I'm standing. These are just right here. You can just come along and pick stuff. You can weed. Like as you get older, these things start to matter. Like no crawling around on the ground, weeding, and you know, crawling around underneath plants trying to find what you're picking. Like last year I did my green beans, bush beans in the raised beds, and that was just like a revelation because you can just walk along and pick, because you know how if you grow green beans, you know you're out here picking them. Once they come on, especially bush beans, you're picking them every day. And to just be able to walk along and pick, oh my goodness. And they're shorter raised beds. They're like these are 36 inch or 33. I think they're 36. But there are 18-inch raised beds, but to me that's almost worse. Because if they're 18-inch beds, then it's like, to me that's the worst of all worlds, because you're having to hunch down and do stuff the whole time. You're bending over. I mean, I guess you could sit. I have a little bench seat that you can pull along and just sit next to the bed and go, but why not just stand? Except these are way more expensive. But this was so worth it. I highly recommend the 36-inch raised beds. So I've just raked out this bed, and you can see along the edge here we still need to bring in cardboard and mulch like we did around the raised beds, which we haven't done yet. So just ignore the weeds, and I'm going to go ahead and get these potted tomatoes in the ground. And one thing I'm going to share about tomatoes, you can see where this is in the pot here. I'm going to go ahead and plant this quite a bit deeper. What I'm going to probably do is remove these bottom, like that little bottom branch right there. I'm going to probably pinch that off, and you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but you can see some down in here as well. I'm going to pinch these off, and I usually plant these, I'm going to pinch this one off too. I'm going to probably plant that much deeper than what's in the dirt, in the potting soil in the pot here. So when you plant your tomatoes, you'll see all along the stem, I don't know if you can see that, but all along the stem often you'll see little sort of bumps almost. All of those have the capacity to become roots later on. So you can give your tomatoes kind of a nice boost, and it'll feel weird because you'll be losing some of the height of the tomato, but if you plant them extra deep, they're going to take off really quick, because all these little nodules along that stem that was above ground are now going to set roots in the ground, and you're going to see happy, sturdy tomato plants coming up with all that extra root growth going on under the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and put these all in the ground quite a bit deeper. Like these, I'll show you, these are so leggy because they've been in the greenhouse and it got cold, so they shot up, but you can see, look at how much, sadly, see the cold damage there? It's all crispy. So what I'm going to do is these two sad little plants that are in this pot, I'm going to plant them in the ground, probably seriously that deep. So all that will be above the ground is that. And all of this I will put in the ground, and that will start taking off roots. And you'll see these take off and they'll be fine. But like we said, we're not going to have tomatoes by the 4th of July, not by any stretch of the imagination. Usually my tomatoes here in this exact garden, and we're zone 5B to 6A, I believe, I don't usually start picking tomatoes for real until the end of August. Even if I start them early inside or in the greenhouse, I just have never picked anything earlier than that. And usually I'm picking well into September, and then I end up covering them over this frame with plastic into the fall so I can pick them into the fall after the cold weather starts. So let's get these in the ground, and I will show you what it looks like when they're done. And what I do to start, because this is a new bed that we haven't used before, I've got 12 tomatoes and 14 feet of row here. So I'm going to put 6 down each side, and I will usually try to put my, these two in the front are my cherry and yellow pear, because those are fun for snacking on, so they're nice if they're up front, easy to grab. And I watered these a bit so they're damp going in the ground. This plant's doing okay, so I'm not going to go super deep with it. but you can. And I've actually seen people that lay them down, you know, like lay it this way and then just bury everything but the top. But I don't know, I've never gotten that crazy about planting them at different depths, but I have seen it done and it does seem to work really well. And I don't put anything in the bottom of the hole either. Some people do, I just don't. There's all kinds of fertilizers you can do. There's people that swear by, you know, whatever, eggshells or fish or whatever the old wives' tale is. I just don't. I just put them in the ground. And I will probably hit this bed with a general vegetable fertilizer, like tomato and vegetable fertilizer. Chime in down below in the comments and let me know what your trick is for tomatoes. Everyone loves to know what other people are doing for what, you know, what's the 100% the best tomato way to grow, you know, what, let us know. All right, and there you can see all 12 are in the ground, and they're all about as deep as I want. There's a couple I could have planted deeper, but they're going to be fine. And since this is the end of the garden space here, I think I'm going to use this little block. Is about all I'm going to want for corn. We just want some for fresh this year. So I did just go ahead and measure it because I like to know. This area, I guessed it was about 8 by 14, and it's almost exactly 8 by 14. And I'll show you, all I use for my planting days is really just this rake, which is, it's funny, but you know, there's probably a special tool for everything. I don't roll that way. I make one tool that works for everything. So when you're planting corn, the one thing you don't want to do is just plant one big long row of corn, because the tassels, the silks on corn, are kind of the pollinator. Each one of those silks goes to basically a kernel of corn, and they all need to get pollinated for all those lovely kernels to get ripe. And if you plant everything in a row, you're going to have a lot harder time getting germination and pollination to happen, because the pollen has to fall down from the top tassels on the corn down to the silks. So recommended is to plant them in a block. So I've always planted, and I've always planted a lot more than this. Usually we do 2 to 2.5 full 26-foot rows, 4 feet wide each, and we do 2.5 rows of corn, but I have a lot of corn left in the pantry. So I'm going to measure in 3 feet, and we're going to do 2 blocks of 3-foot corn, and then in the 3-foot row I will put them about 6 to 8 inches apart, and I'll do 2 seeds every 6 inches, just solid in the whole row. And that way you can hoe between them. You can reach in to pick from either side of the row, and that is what has always worked for us. In fact, I've always done 4-foot rows. So you've got 6 to 8 inch spacing, just solid, just basically, you know, I don't know what you call intensive planting. So you intensively plant a whole 4-foot row, and then give yourself a little walkway that wide between the rows, and that way you can squeeze down the aisle and pick corn from either side. So my walkways are 13.5 inches wide, just enough. Like, it's always been enough to just walk up and down or crawl up and down and get your stuff dealt with between your planted rows. But I'm just eyeballing this to give myself a walkway between what will be 2 lines of corn. And then it'll be basically a block that comes all the way back. And kind of watch your line. If you want to use string, you know, you can put stakes and strings and make sure everything's perfectly straight, but over the years, I've just learned to just, I'll usually just eyeball it, because whatever. So this just becomes my walkway, and as you pull that soil, you can see it kind of building up outside the rake, and I just pull it into the bed to make myself a wee raised bed. It's not like really raised, or maybe you could call it a sunken walkway. So the walkway is down, just delineated enough so you can see where you're supposed to walk. That is about 30 inches of row. I'm going to put in 1, 2, I'll probably put 3 lines of corn in each of these instead of more than that. So 30 divided by 3, so about every 10 inches this way. And then the seeds in the row, in the line, will be about 6 inches apart. I just want room to get a hoe between them, and that's it. And I do like to plant my corn if I can, because I rotate crops around each year. They're in a different place than they were last year. So the corn won't be here again next year. But I do like to try to plant it where it won't shade things. And this is the north side of my garden, so nothing's going to be shaded by the corn except a little bit of the raspberries. But you do have to watch that. You know, you don't want to put your corn where something on the north side of it is going to be shaded by the height of the corn as it grows. But on the flip side of that, if you want stuff that's going to need to be shaded in the heat of high summer, plant it the other way and put the corn where it will cause some shade for some things. If you want to have them get some cool weather through that hot August and September weather, and in July, depending on where you're at, you can plant it the opposite way and plant your corn where it will. I've done it where I've planted the corn where it could provide some shade for things like my broccoli and cauliflower that were going late into the summer. So plan ahead and keep in mind the water requirements and the heights of the things that you're planting and where you're planting them in relation to each other and in relation to the sun and the wind. If you have wind that hits from one direction or another, don't plant your corn with the long side of a whole wall of corn facing into the wind, or it can get pushed. It'll just push the whole block over. Don't ask me how I know that. And you'll come out one day and all of your corn will be. So plant it where it's kind of leaning into the wind a bit. So these are going east-west, and our wind usually comes from the west. So it'll come this way. The raspberries will be a bit of a block and it won't blow our corn over when it gets tall. And here is the part where the rake comes in handy yet again when I'm planting in rows. This is why I love this rake. Like, it's my everything tool. So you make your walkways, you make your beds. Let me hop over. And then when I want to plant the rows, corn goes pretty deep. I use the end of it, and you can see it's all beat up. But I'll use the end to mark my line where the seeds are going to go. And then in the end, once the seeds are planted, you turn the rake around and use the rake end to pull the dirt back over the little trench. So this tool really, like, if I had to garden for the rest of my life, just don't lose the rake. Like, don't take my rake. That's what I use for everything. And I do love a good triangle hoe for this. Those really sharp, wicked sharp triangles. And you can pull the same, do the same idea with the little pointed end. But if you have a tool in your hand that works, you might as well use it. So here we are, using the rake. And you can totally do the math. What I'll do is keep track, and then we'll see how much we got off of this. At the end of the year, we've got 3 rows, 3 lines times 2, so 6 lines, 14 feet long, and two corn seeds planted every 6 inches. There's your word problem for the day. So if Steph had 2 rows of 3 lines, 14 feet long each, and each row has 2 seeds planted every 6 inches, how many plants will you get, and how many seeds will you need? And then at the end of the year, you keep track of how much corn you got off that amount, and then you keep track of how many seeds you planted. You can see where I'm going with that. You'll be able to figure out how many seeds do you need for X harvest. How much did you get from those seeds? And then next year you'll have a better idea. Or you can weigh it, like if you did so many ounces of seed. But I like an exact. I like to know I planted 293 seeds and I got 27 pints of corn, or whatever the harvest, 100 ears, or make notes. Just make notes, whatever works for you, but make notes on everything. And once you start, you'll always have sort of a reference of, each year. Those notes are going to be invaluable because they're going to be specific to your garden, your weather, your family, your harvest needs, how much you preserve, how much you eat fresh. All of that is going to be different for all of us. This way you don't end up kneeling in the dirt, which I have been known to do as well, but I don't feel like kneeling in the dirt today. So 2 seeds every 6 inches. I'll see you in a little bit. All right, we got it all planted, and I just did the math, and it came out pretty right. I counted how many are in each line here. So I have 3 lines, 25 sets of 2. So what is that? Do the math. Anyway, it's about every 6 inches, and then I just take my rake at an angle and just pull the soil over the little trench with the corn in it. Alright, it's time to talk about tripods for beans. And these are just those green stakes that you can get at any garden center. They're all different lengths, and I have them in all different lengths, and I'm just using what I have. And I'll show you what I mean here when I show you the ones I already have made. I take 3 of these. You can do 4, but I found that 3 works fine. And basically you're just going to build a little teepee. And I just take them and put them kind of triangle distance, equidistant apart. And again, I'm using what I have. This is my garden twine, but my other ones I used baling twine, that ugly blue string, and I just wrap it, kind of weave it in and out between the tops of these, and wrap them under, kind of just under and over. You just want to make sure that they're not going to go anywhere during the garden season. And once you have them wrapped kind of all in every direction that you can think of to hold them together, then I just tie them in a knot and set them in the garden where I want. So we'll tie that off like that. And then you could adjust them so they make a little triangle like that. And you can get fancy and get all the same size length, but I just use them over and over every year. And then what I'll do, once we set these in a line in the garden in a row, and here's what they look like in the ground. So I just space them pretty close together and pretty tight. And there you have a nice row where we will plant beans at the bottom of all of these. Okay, it is getting later in the day and I am getting tired, but we've got the tripods up and there's beans planted at the base. I put the 2 bush acorn squash right here in this little bed, and then I raked out the rest of 3 more beds here. So these next 2 beds, I won't subject you to me planting them, but these are going to be wax beans a row, and I do the same thing I do with the corn, and I'll plant them about 6 inches apart kind of all around and intensively plant those rows. So they'll be green beans, wax beans, and then this is a row of salad cucumbers up front, and then pickling cucumbers at the back. And then this I just placed some of the squash and things that vine around over here, but I need to bring the tractor in and bring in some more. I need to put cardboard over there and put some more dirt in that low spot, so I can't put those in the ground yet. But this will be where all the viney things are, and it looks like we have room for all of it. Tomatoes are all in, peppers are in, crookneck squash are in, and the cucumbers and beans. The only thing that I won't get to today is the wax beans and the green beans, which I'll do in the morning. So the next day, I got out here and finished all of this. So I added cardboard and 8 loads of dirt and got the squash and melons in there. So there's the cucumbers and wax beans, green beans, and there's my lovely tripods and the corn and potatoes. And then I still need to finish mulching. And that's how I finished all the stuff I needed to get done in June. Everything's planted and growing, and we can just wait for harvesting, and we need to still deal with this middle aisle for weeds, etc., but that will happen. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.